We're behind the magic, behind the scenes. I think we're recording. Hopefully you see the slides and not me, but I cannot promise any of that. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so today we're going to be doing the Icelandic sagas. We've done some research, we've watched some of the videos. Now we're going to talk about it. But along with that, we are actually going to talk about Greenland. So we have a totally new subject, hey, that we were talking about the Icelandic sagas. We're going to move ahead. We're going to talk about Greenland. Just keep you on your toes. So this is what we're going to be talking about in today's class. If I keep looking off to the side, it's because I got a new screen. Yay for me. And so I kind of look off to the side over there sometimes. But we're going to be talking about Greenland. We'll talk about, and I encourage you to be critical of what we're reading. Like, why do you like this? Why do you not like it? What are some of the problems with this story, with these stories? Admittedly, these are not the best stories, or at least the way I see them. So, it's okay to say that. If you don't like them, it's okay. Just have a good, reasoning of why you don't like them or where you think they can be better. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the geography of Iceland, which is how that affects the stories, which is really kind of what we're moving into. Some suggestions for reading difficult readings, things that we may kind of not be excited to read about. And then we're going to talk about our good friend Grettir and what kind of silly things is he up to these days. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with Greenland, so we see Greenland, we see Iceland, we've been studying Iceland. Greenland is this huge mass of almost ice. It's more icy than Iceland, but it's nearby relatively. And so remember, keep this in mind of, hundreds of years ago and what people are having to do to travel. So it's not that simple of just hopping an airplane and going somewhere. Like they're crossing that sea. It's not that safe. So why would they do that? And that's one of those things that come up in the stories. Now, as far as Greenland, the two big sagas for the Greenlanders are the Saga of the Greenlanders, and those are a lot like the Saga of the Icelanders, not only in the way they sound, but it's who started this town and who started that town and what laws did they start. And then Eric the Red, and you may have heard that name thrown around as one of the people who quote unquote discovered America, and that's exactly who we're talking about. Why did he get up and go? So keep in mind, we're talking about the 900s. It's a long time ago. So, but these are events that happened in the 900s, but they weren't written down to the 1200s. So again, kind of like we talked about with the Icelandic sagas, what was changed? What was used to make the stories more exciting? A lot of times there's a term that we talk about of how the victors write history. The winners are the ones who get to tell the story. Are there some things left out because, the winners got to write the stories? And again, just like the Icelandic sagas, these are oral histories. They weren't really written down. So what are the changes as people are telling the stories? We can be telling the exact same story, but completely differently. And so, even think of in the Gospels of the Bible. So the four books, Luke, Matthew, John, the other guy. It's the same story, but they're told differently. And some things are left out, and some things are told. So it's kind of the same thing. Like if you have four different people telling the same story, is it going to be the same story that gets to when we arrive to 1200? Is that going to be which story is that person putting pen to paper? Are they really going to be using? And so we're in these stories too. It's the same trope, but just a different environment. And how does that change? So even think of like movies today. So like when we're talking about tropes, does the story change? Same thing. Boy meets girl, fall in love. Is that a different story if we do it in Alaska as opposed to Saudi Arabia? And these stories were really fanciful. So like dragons and ogres, lions. Oh my. And then, but there is some archaeological evidence that indicates that, that the core of these stories are true. And, they have found remnants and artifacts from the Vikings in Canada dating to 1000 Common Era. So it's not like they're completely made up, but how much of that is actually historically true, and how much is that, hey, we're going to throw in a dragon because dragons are cool? So the major themes in these stories are the settlement. So just stories of how did we make a town. And then what comes later is an introduction and conflict regarding Christianity. How did it come in? Just in the stories, they shift from, you know, Odin is watching over us to God is watching over us. And what are the influences and reasons that is occurring? So how did it all work out? So we have this place called Vinland, and that's Canada as we know it now. And that, they tried settlements and those just did not work out. Um, in Greenland, we have what's called the Western settlement, and that's where things kind of started up. And then there's this gap where it died out. We don't know why. But then we have an Eastern settlement pop up on 1480, and we don't really have any proof that the Western just traveled and became the Eastern. So there's this gap, and there's this huge why. Um, and that could be, you you as a historian. So think about it. Like, what is your story to put in there? And when you're writing the story, are you trying to be really, really accurate? Like, I want this to be the news of that time, and I want to have proof. If you're just a storyteller, do you make things up? Did at 1350 did dragons come out of the sky and there was a huge battle? And that sounds a lot better than, I don't know, maybe they ran out of food. So in Greenland and in Vinland, like they weren't self-sufficient. And we're talking like upper Canada, so like icy, not a lot of good places to grow food or to bring in livestock. So there was a lot of trading. So what could they have traded for? And really what they were trading for in these areas were good for was luxury goods, really expensive pelts. So like polar bear blankets. There was a thing called a griffin, which was a bird and was really considered really popular to like have. That would be like the gold chain of today would be have one of these birds, and hunting for walruses because then you could take the ivory and turn it into jewelry. So it was kind of, hey, we're going to start this settlement, not that we're going to have a good time, be able to produce food and raise families there, but it's like we're going to go there because we could deplete the resources there and sell them to people and trade them for food or even just to make, whatever the form of money is at the time. So why is this a big deal? Well, let's see if we can apply that to anything now. Do we have any places where there have been started communities so that other communities can get not essentially basics like food and shelter, but can get any other resources? So let's think maybe even gas. That's not the ideally where you think of the best place to go live out in the desert, but we have communities that are built up there based on being able to extract resources to trade to other areas. A big thing now is some of the minerals needed to run your computer or your phone. That's in Africa. So, and this is a long-standing history of what we call colonialism. And it may not be what it looked like 100 years ago, but it might be something of what we call economic colonialism. And so it's for you to decide if that's the same thing going on. And as we have debates about it, a lot of times people like to think of, oh, this is a new phenomenon. It's been going on for since 1000 CE, if not more. And so what's the big deal about why are we studying about the area? And we've talked about this a bit when we were studying, Native American history. That sometimes we connect to the land. And not in the past. Even think of today. Think about like where people are from and how connected they get. And just as an observation, what I notice is a lot of people like in New York, people are very connected to being from New York. If you ask them where they're from, they'll tell you like a block that they're from. Whereas in Los Angeles, it's very transient. It's not as connected. It's not as, oh, it's a big deal. So depending on where you're from and the land and the landmarks, it builds an identity. Just and it's kind of silly, but the whole New York pizza versus Chicago pizza, which one's better? A sports team, my sports team better than your team. It also goes to relationships. You're from my area, I'm more likely to care. We talked about that in other classes about proximity. Like you connect, you live the same way as I do. I'm more likely to think that you're more likely to care based on that. And then social customs. And this can be as simple as if you think of the environment, the customs that develop out of, say, Alaska would be different than they are in Saudi Arabia, simply because of the climate. So you're not going to find very many people in Saudi Arabia wearing coats, and things that develop, very simple things that develop from, okay, I need a coat. When do I need to do certain activities? What jobs are available because of, what the land provides and what people were doing 100 years ago. Are we still doing that? So let's talk a little bit about how to read things we don't want to. And it can be very scary to see a huge, hey, read this 5,000 pages. So first thing to do is to simplify the text. And this really has to do when we get things like the sagas, Shakespeare, we're just not talking like the way they do, the way we do now. So what are they saying? And then like in the Shakespeare example, it's easier to go see a Shakespeare play than it is to try to read it. It doesn't make a lot of sense reading a lot of times, but you can go see the play and be like, oh, that's what's going on. So that's something. If watch a movie, the movie is going to be different, but you get an idea of what's going on if you're having a hard time getting through the text. And really, these next two examples, the reason they're in red is these are the questions you should be answering to write a good paper. All right. This thing is going on. If we think about the sagas, right, and we have talked about how they're not the most exciting things. Like they're kind of disappointing when we think about them and what's going to go on, and then we read them. We're like, well, that was kind of a letdown. Why is it important, and to who is it important to? So again, like talking about who founded a town may not excite us right now in our modern world, but it might have been really important a couple of hundred years ago. What really happened too? So we talk about, you know, who is telling us the story? Where are we getting this information? Is there a little bit of exaggeration? There are a lot of exaggeration. So what really happened? What do you believe really happened when I tell you And if we kind of think about it, even just like with Grettir, so like in different versions, I mean, his name is Grettir the Outlaw. We think of outlaws as a positive, but in a lot of the cases, they try to, oh, he's just misunderstood. In other versions, it's like he's kind of a jerk. So, what really happened, or how do you view things happening? So, again, with the hey, this is kind of difficult to get through. It's something else, and compare it. Maybe it helps you understand what's going on, or maybe it helps you understand why the story you're supposed to read or assigned to read isn't as exciting as the story you want to read. And there's an entire genre of study called comparative literature where that's where things are done. Why is this? What's the difference between Hamlet and The Lion King? Read in small bites. No one said you had to read the whole thing all at once, or maybe someone did. It's probably not a good idea. I usually do about 10 pages, or else my eyes get sleepy. Go play a video game. Yes, I'm telling you, go play a video game. If you're really struggling with the text, it's not going to do you any good. I know, I do it too. You're kind of reading, but you're really just kind of getting through the page. Go do something to step away, do it in smaller bites. So let's do, the last thing we'll do here is we'll take a look at what we learned. How do we apply that? So this is actually the title to one of the chapters from our good friend Grettir. I'm not going to pronounce these things correctly because they're hard to pronounce. But we just start. Grettir. Do we know him? Yeah, we wrote about him. He's an outlaw. And I really, really want you to go back and what is the difference of what he's portrayed in like that movie about him versus the tale of when you have someone else giving you the synopsis versus actually reading like who is this guy? Like why is he important? Is he actually important? All right. So he goes visits Bjorn. Don't really know who Bjorn is, but he's this Hitdale warrior. And I actually tried to look up what a Hitdale warrior is. Couldn't find anything. But we can infer, so we can guess based upon good information, that being a Hitdale warrior was probably important because we're mentioning it. If it wasn't important, they just call him Bjorn. But he's Bjorn the Hitdale warrior. So there's some importance in that we can infer. All right, and Grettir takes refuge. So he's hiding. So that's small. We can process that. In the Fagras I looked it up. So Fagras school means beautiful valley. Fa means volcano. So it's gonna be, kind of like that beautiful area surrounding this volcano. So the beautiful part kind of throws me, all right, it's a volcano. What if we were to change that? Think about it. So like what's the difference and kind of like takes refuge in Mordor. All right, that's different. Takes refuge uh, at the local Walmart. Well, that becomes a whole different story. So how and what I really want you to think about, even though you may not know what Fagerskosval is, get an idea. It's a kind of a view like a volcano, and that's probably all dark and scary, but surrounded. And actually, Fagerskosval is kind of a recently still an active volcano. So how does that change? If we change it to Mordor, if we change it to Denny's, we're just Greta and Bjorn are just hanging out at Denny's later. Like, is that interesting? And think about it not only in our times, so think about it in our times. Is that interesting in our times? Hey, Greta and Bjorn are hanging out at Denny's versus, 1,900, the year 900, with Greta and this warrior hiding in a volcano. Or if you change it to, from 900, what would be the difference if in the year 900 they took refuge in a boat in the sea? How does that change everything? Or even if we change who Grettir is visiting, if Grettir visits the tavern keeper, how does that change everything? Doesn't matter. Who does it matter to? And do you care? Because really, that's what we're going to get at. Do you care? And why or why not? All right. Have a great week.